Before we begin, I must warn you, this is not a story told for comfort. It is a descent. What you are about to hear will not flatter the ego, nor soothe the heart. It will peel away the mask you wear, exposing the cracks you have tried to hide. If you choose to stay, listen with more than ears. Listen with the part of you that trembles in silence. And when the shadows speak, do not turn away, for only those who dare to face the curse will glimpse the truth behind perfection. Now, let us begin. Perfection. The word gleams like polished steel, cold and flawless. The very sound of it carries weight, as if a promise of salvation lies within its letters. Yet studies reveal a terrifying truth. Nearly 90% of those who describe themselves as perfectionists suffer from anxiety, depression, or self-destructive impulses. The pursuit of flawlessness does not liberate. It suffocates. It whispers of control, but it conceals bondage. It looks like light, but it burns like fire. Jung saw it for what it was, not a virtue, curse. To chase perfection is to make war against it. It begins innocently with the desire to improve, to rise above mediocrity, to polish one's life until it reflects only brilliance. But beneath this noble mask, monstrous, Jung warned that perfection is an archetype, an illusion of divine wholeness projected onto, and illusions always demand sacrifice. The more flawless, the more blood it requires. There was once a patient who came to Jung, immaculate in appearance. Her clothes were pressed without crease, her voice measured, her manners impeccable. She was admired in her community as the embodiment of grace. Yet, as she sat in the consulting room, she confessed that every night she scrubbed her hands until they bled, convinced were stained. She dreamed of faceless judges circling her bed, whispering accusations. She smiled in public, but her eyes told another story, an abyss hidden behind porcelain. For Jung, she was the personification of the curse. The radiant mask conceals collapsing. Modern science echoes this nightmare. Cognitive psychology speaks of maladaptive perfectionism, a condition where individuals set standards so impossibly high that failure is inevitable. Neuroscience reveals hyperactivity in the anterior cingulate cortex, the brain's error detection system, in those who strive obsessively for flawlessness. Their minds become prisons of alarm, constantly scanning for cracks in the mirror. Instead of peace, they live in perpetual judgment, both executioner and condemned. Yet this truth is older than science. In Greek myth, Icarus fashioned wings to soar closer to the sun, seeking perfection in flight. His ambition became his downfall, the wax melting, his body swallowed by the sea. In Christianity, Lucifer himself fell not because of weakness, but because of pride, the desire to be flawless, equal to God. In Buddhism, clinging to purity is considered one of the final illusions, a subtle chain that binds the seeker to suffering. Perfection, across all traditions, is not exaltation, but exile. The signs of this curse are subtle at first, almost invisible. A student rewriting the same essay until dawn, never satisfied. A parent who cannot allow their child to err, polishing every detail of their world into suffocating order. A worker who smiles while inside they tremble, terrified of a single mistake that will reveal their... Each scene is like a still photograph, beautiful on the surface but haunted by shadows. The silence after their smiles is heavy, as if waiting for something to shatter. The progression of the curse is merciless. First, it appears as motivation, the drive to excel, to improve, to be the best. Then, it transforms into obsession. No achievement is enough, no success is sufficient. Next, despair seeps in, exhaustion, sleepless nights, the gnawing sense that one is never whole. Finally, collapse, a breakdown, an illness, or an act of self-destruction that reveals the truth. Perfection was never attainable, only a mirage leading deeper into the desert. But this curse does not stop at individuals. Families are infected, raising children to be flawless trophies, crushing them under expectations. Communities demand conformity, shaming any deviation from the image of success. Nations exalt ideals of purity, racial, cultural, moral, while committing atrocities in the name of their perfection. Jung called this possession by the archetype, when the collective wears the mask so tightly that it forgets the face beneath, and the shadow erupts with catastrophic force. What then is the defense? Jung's answer was as unsettling as it was liberating. Embrace imperfection, not as failure, but as humanity. To acknowledge flaws, cracks, shadows, not to indulge them, but to integrate them, is the only way to escape the tyranny of the perfect mask. Wholeness, he wrote, is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. The conscious acceptance of shadow becomes a shield, stronger than any illusion of flawlessness. The climax of this revelation is always the same. The mirror of perfection shatters. The individual, trembling in the ruins of their mask, sees themselves not as divine, but as human, fragile, flawed, incomplete. And in this moment a strange freedom emerges. For the first time, the smile is not a lie, the silence is not a prison, the light is not an enemy of the dark. Perfection was the curse. The fracture is the cure. So the first lesson of this journey is clear. The pursuit of flawlessness is not salvation, but shadow. Behind every perfect face is a wound. Behind every flawless mask is a scream. The price of perfection is the self, and to chase it, to stand at the edge of an abyss that does not end. Perfection begins as a dream, a vision of the ideal self, graceful, unshaken, admired, untouchable. It glitters in the imagination like a distant star. But Jung warned that ideals, when pursued blindly, become prisons. What begins as inspiration hardens into chains. The ideal whispers promises of transcendence, yet it extracts its price in blood. Consider the patient Jung once described, a man whose life was built upon achievement. His career was flawless, his home immaculate, his body sculpted with discipline. Every detail of his existence was orchestrated like a symphony. But in his dreams, he saw himself locked inside a glass cage. Outside, crowds applauded, admiring his perfection. Inside, he clawed at the walls, desperate to breathe. When Jung spoke to him, he said only this: "You have become your own perfection you built, the cell in which you." Modern research psychologists have identified what they call perfectionistic self-presentation, the compulsive need to appear flawless before others. Functional brain imaging reveals heightened activity in regions tied to self-monitoring, showing how perfectionists constantly scan themselves as though watched by invisible judges. Neuroscience confirms what Jung intuited. The ideal is not a liberator, but a surveillance tower erected in the mind, with the self both prisoner and guard. Ancient wisdom warned us as well. In Greek myth, Pygmalion sculpted the perfect woman out of ivory, only to fall in love with the lifeless statue he created. In Christianity, the Pharisees embodied flawless adherence to law, yet their hearts withered in hypocrisy. In Buddhism, striving for an ideal self is seen as delusion, a refusal to accept the impermanence and imperfection of existence. The prison of the ideal was always known. To chase a star is to forget the ground beneath your feet. The signs of imprisonment creep in quietly. The student who never shares their work for fear it is not good enough. The mother who cannot allow a speck of dust in her home, her hands raw from endless scrubbing. The man who forces a smile at every gathering, even as exhaustion. Each gesture appears noble, but beneath it thrums the terror of it. The mask must remain perfect, or the prison doors will swing open and reveal the trembling soul. The stages of this prison are merciless. At first, the ideal inspires. One feels strong, uplifted, invincible. Then the walls rise. No success is enough, no achievement sufficient. The self begins to shrink, bowing under the weight of unreachable standards. Finally, despair takes root. Sleepless nights, compulsive rituals, the haunting conviction that imperfection is sin. Collapse follows swiftly, the prisoner unable to maintain the illusion, the walls closing in. But the prison is never solitary. Families often forge ideals and lock their children inside them. A son expected to be brilliant, a daughter sculpted into beauty, both crushed under expectations they did not choose. Communities enforce standards of purity, honor, respectability, punishing deviation as shameful. Nations, too, exalt ideals, racial purity, moral superiority, cultural dominance, while concealing violence and corruption behind the facade. Jung warned that the collective ideal is the most dangerous prison, for when it cracks, its collapse is catastrophic. What, then, is the escape? Jung's answer was neither surrender nor indulgence, but confrontation. One must name the ideal as illusion, strip it of its divine aura, and see it for what it is, a mask that hides the human. To admit imperfection, to confess failure, to allow flaw, these acts become keys that unlock the prison dissolves not by destroying the walls, but by recognizing they were never real. The climax of this revelation is devastating yet liberating. To stand outside the cage, trembling, no longer adored as flawless, no longer worshipped as ideal, but seen as human, fragile, contradictory, whole. The applause fades, the spotlight dims, but in the silence something stronger arises. The self, not the ideal, breathes again. Jung saw this as the beginning of individuation, the birth of true self from the ruins of perfection's prison. So I ask you, what ideal has locked you inside its glass? What applause have you mistaken for freedom? And are you ready to shatter the illusion and step into the uncertain air? Perfection always demands payment. It does not ask politely. It extracts tribute, like an ancient god whose altar is studded with offering. Jung warned that every pursuit of flawlessness carries a hidden cost, and that cost is always human. Behind every polished surface lies exhaustion, despair, and blood. The price is not metaphorical. It is paid with sleepless nights, raw nerves, broken bodies. I recall a story Jung once described in the quiet notes of his practice. A young woman, praised as brilliant, flawless in her studies, meticulous in every gesture, entered his consulting room, trembling. Her notebooks were immaculate, every letter sharp, every margin aligned, yet her hand shook as if she had been holding fire. She confessed that at night she clawed at her skin, convinced that imperfection was crawling on her. She dreamed of being torn open, her organs inspected for flaws. She wept not because she feared death, because she feared being found imperfect. To Jung, she embodied the sacrifice demanded by the idol of flawlessness. Modern science confirms the clinical psychology has shown that perfectionism correlates with higher rates of self-harm, substance abuse, and eating disorders. Neuroscience reveals that the stress circuits of perfectionists remain chronically active, flooding the body with cortisol until it begins to collapse. Immune systems weakened, hearts strained, cells aging prematurely. To live under the tyranny of flawlessness is to burn from within. The altar of perfection is not in temples. It is in bodies that cannot endure the weight of impossible standards. But humanity has always known of this blood price. In Greek myth, the goddess Artemis demanded absolute purity from her followers, and those who faltered were torn apart. In Christianity, the Pharisees presented immaculate laws but sacrificed compassion in the process. In Buddhism, clinging to perfection is warned against as a form of subtle violence against oneself and others. Perfection across all traditions has been portrayed not as grace, but as cruelty disguised as virtue. The signs of this blood price are visible if you dare to look. The exhausted student who hides behind glowing grades but trembles at failure. The athlete who trains until bones fracture, smiling as if the pain were triumph. The mother whose home shines with sterile beauty while her body withers from unspoken fatigue. Each is a ritual sacrifice, a life offered silently to the God of flawless. The stages of sacrifice follow a chilling progression. First comes devotion. The perfectionist pours themselves into every task, radiant with discipline. Then comes obsession. Each flaw becomes an enemy, each mistake a mortal wound. Next comes mutilation. The self is cut apart, whether through addiction, illness, or despair. Finally comes collapse. The sacrifice is complete, the individual consumed by the very standards they sought to embody. The altar is satisfied, but the soul is gone. This pattern infects not only individuals, but entire collective. Families demand perfection from children, raising them as proof of honor, yet crushing them under impossible weight. Communities exalt flawless reputations, silencing scandal until it festers into tragedy. Nations pursue ideals of purity, superiority, greatness, offering their citizens sacrifices in wars, persecutions, genocides. Jung saw this with terror. The blood price of perfection magnifies when the mask is worn by crowds. What is the defense against such tyranny? Jung's answer was stark. Stop worshiping. To admit flaws, to embrace humanity, to confess failure is not weakness. It is rebellion. The moment one names imperfection not as sin but as truth, the altar loses. Consciousness becomes a weapon. To see the shadow, to accept it, to integrate it, is to end the cycle of sacrifice. The climax of this revelation is terrifying but liberating. The perfectionist, stripped of their mask, stands in ruins, exhausted, scarred, but alive. For the first time, they are not an offering, not a victim of impossible standards, but a human being. Jung insisted that wholeness requires this death of the flawless self. Only by letting the idol collapse can the true self emerge. So I ask you, what altar have you bled upon? What flaw have you feared so much that you sacrificed your soul to hide it? And are you willing to abandon the God of perfection before it consumes you entirely? Perfection does not simply live inside the mind. It wears a mask of stainless light, polished until it blinds. To the world it appears radiant, admirable, worthy of imitation. But Jung warned that every mask conceals a face, and behind the mask of perfection lurks the shadow. The brighter the light, the deeper the darkness it hides. Consider the patient Jung once described who seemed incapable of error. She dressed immaculately, never stumbled over words, never allowed a trace of anger to surface. Her neighbors adored her. Her colleagues envied her. Yet, in the privacy of Jung's consulting room, she confessed that she rehearsed her smile in the mirror each morning, terrified that her lips might betray her inner rage. She dreamed of shadows creeping across her walls, whispering accusation. She admitted that she feared silence, because in silence the mask slipped, and the face beneath began to scream. For Jung, she was not a saint of discipline, but a prisoner of stainless light. Modern psychology names this phenomenon perfectionistic self-presentation. It is the relentless display of flawlessness before others, even at the cost of truth. Studies show that those who live behind this mask report higher loneliness, alienation, and suicidal ideation. Neuroscience reveals that the constant effort to manage self-image overloads the brain's executive control system, leading to burnout and breakdown. The mask does not protect, it strangles. Ancient wisdom also spoke of masks. In Greek tragedy, actors wore faces carved from wood, amplifying voices but hiding truth. In Christianity, Christ condemned the Pharisees for polishing the outside of the cup while leaving the inside filthy. In Buddhism, clinging to appearances is seen as delusion, a refusal to accept the impermanence of reality. The mask of perfection is not new. It's the oldest disguise humanity has ever worn. The warning signs are eerie, cinematic in their subtlety. The colleague who smiles too quickly, as if practiced. The friend whose every photograph looks staged, their face always at the same angle. The family that insists everything is fine, even as their voices crack. Beneath these performances, the silence grows heavy, waiting for the mask to slip. The progression of the mask follows a cruel arc. First comes admiration. The world rewards flawless appearances. Then comes compulsion. The individual cannot allow a single crack to show. Next comes suffocation. The mask consumes energy, leaving the face beneath starved and exhausted. Finally comes fracture. The mask shatters suddenly, exposing the shadow in violent eruption. Those who watched are always. They seemed perfect. They never saw the face, but the mask is never worn by individuals alone. Families wear it, presenting an image of harmony while hiding abuse. Communities wear it, boasting of purity while corruption festers. Nations wear it, parading triumphs while silencing dissent. Jung warned of the collective persona, the mask worn by entire societies. When it breaks, the shadow erupts, not in one life, but in history. Wars, collapses, genocides. What is the defense against this stainless mask? Jung's answer was brutal honesty, to tear the mask away in solitude, to admit rage, envy, despair, weakness, to show imperfection deliberately, refusing to perform flawless. Consciousness becomes a blade, cutting through the porcelain disguise. Only in this nakedness can the self breathe again. The climax of this revelation is unforgettable. To stand without the mask, trembling, exposed, perhaps rejected, yet finally authentic. No longer stainless light, but fractured light, truthful, human, whole. Jung insisted that only in imperfection do we find wholeness. The mask of perfection is not salvation, but suffocation. So I ask you, what mask of stainless light have you worn, and what shadow waits behind it, patient, hungry, waiting for the day it will be revealed? Perfection is not sustainable. It burns too brightly, consumes too much, demands too deeply. Jung knew that the pursuit of flawlessness does not end in triumph, but in collapse. The collapse is not a possibility. It is an inevitability. What begins as a gentle crack becomes a fracture, and what fractures becomes ruin. Picture the patient Jung once described, a young man, disciplined beyond measure, his handwriting precise, his room immaculate, his achievements endless. People praised him as a model of, yet one day he simply stopped speaking. He sat in Jung's consulting room, silent, unresponsive, as though words themselves had betrayed him. When he finally spoke, his voice was, "I cannot keep it up anymore." He had lived as perfection's soldier. The war inside had broken him. His collapse was not failure, the shadow demanding Modern science explains these implosions with chilling precision. Studies on perfectionism reveal that it is strongly correlated with burnout syndrome. The brain, trapped in constant error monitoring, floods the body with stress hormones. Sleep disintegrates, memory falters, mood plummets. Researchers at major universities link perfectionism to suicide risk, the collapse arriving not with warning, but like sudden darkness. Neuroscience confirms Jung's prophecy. The psyche can only endure so much repression before it cracks. But humanity always knew collapse as the price of hubris. In Greek myth, the mighty Achilles was undone not by his strength, but by a single weakness. In Christianity, the Tower of Babel reached toward heaven until it shattered into confusion. In Buddhism, clinging too tightly to purity leads to despair when impermanence asserts itself. Collapse is not an accident. It is built into the architecture of perfection. The signs of collapse creep in like whispers at first. The student who once reveled in achievement suddenly hesitates to begin. The worker once admired for flawless results makes small errors, then panics at their meaning. The parent who prided themselves on order begins to lash out at trivial disruptions. Each moment is a fissure in the wall, each silence a warning of the flood to come. The stages unfold with merciless rhythm. First, strain. The pursuit of flawlessness begins to exhaust. Next, fracture. Mistakes appear. Anxiety deepens. Sleeplessness grows. Then, disintegration. Breakdowns of health, relationships, and identity. Finally, collapse. A complete implosion, often masked as sudden but, in truth, cultivated for years. The fall is not dramatic for all. It can be quiet, invisible, like a candle that goes out in the night. But whether loud or silent, it comes. And collapse is not limited to individuals. Families collapse under the weight of expectations, siblings turned into enemies by the impossible demand for perfection. Communities collapse when reputations matter more than truth, scandals erupting like fire through hidden rot. Nations collapse when the image of purity, superiority, or flawlessness becomes unsustainable, the shadow breaking through in wars and revolutions. Jung saw this in history. The more rigid the structure, the more violent the fall. What, then, is the survival protocol? Jung insisted that collapse is not to be feared, but to be understood, to recognize cracks early, to admit exhaustion, to confess imperfection, is to release pressure before the walls implode. Consciousness is the only reinforcement, not the reinforcement of stone, but of truth. Collapse, when confronted consciously, becomes transformation. Collapse denied becomes destruction. The climax of this revelation is sobering. To accept collapse not as death, but as initiation. The perfectionist who falls is not annihilated. They are reborn, stripped of illusion, naked but alive. Jung described individuation as this very process, the breaking of masks, the death of the false self, the emergence of the whole. Collapse is not the end. It is the only beginning strong enough to shatter the curse of perfection. So I ask you, where are the cracks in your walls? How long before the fracture becomes ruin? And will you wait for collapse to consume you, or will you dare to confront it before it arrives? Perfection does not shout. It whispers. It does not strike like a storm. It tightens like a noose, slowly, invisibly, until breath becomes impossible. Jung understood this. The most terrifying tyrannies are not loud, but silent. The pursuit of flawlessness rules in exactly this way: subtle, constant, merciless. Imagine a household where every object has its place. The floors gleam, the shelves are ordered, the conversations polite. To outsiders, it is harmony incarnate. But within those walls, children walk on tiptoe, terrified of spilling a drop of milk, of leaving a toy out of line. Their laughter is subdued, their movements rehearsed. They are not raised by parents. They are raised by perfection itself, the silent tyrant who demands order over life. Jung recognized this chilling pattern in families and communities. When perfection rules, humanity is smothered. Modern psychology has given words to what Jung described. Perfectionism correlates strongly with authoritarian households, workplaces, and governments. Studies show that rigid demands for flawlessness breed anxiety, rebellion, or collapse. Neuroscience reveals that chronic self-monitoring engages the brain's threat systems, creating a constant state of vigilance. To live under perfection is to live in permanent alert. The tyrant does not rest, and neither do its subjects. Ancient wisdom, too, depicted this silent rule. In Greek myth, Procrustes offered a perfect bed for every traveler, stretching or cutting them. In Christianity, Pharisaic law sought flawless obedience, yet crushed compassion in the process. In Buddhism, the craving for purity becomes its own form of suffering, a subtle chain, invisible, yet unbreakable. Each tradition warned of the same figure, the tyrant who smiles as he strangles. The warning signs are unsettling when you learn to see them. The friend who apologizes for the smallest errors, as if a slip of the tongue were a mortal crime. The colleague who cannot leave work unfinished, even at the cost of their health. The spouse who polishes the house at midnight, unable to rest in imperfection. These are not quirks. They are the footsteps of the silent tyrant in daily life. The stages of tyranny unfold with cruel precision. First, seduction. Perfection whispers of order, control, beauty. Next, submission. The self obeys, chasing flawless images. Then domination. Flaws are punished, mistakes feared, joy suffocated. Finally, collapse. The subject either breaks under the pressure or rebels in destructive release. Jung saw this in his patients, the moment when obedience to the tyrant became unbearable, the psyche erupting in crisis. And perfection does not confine itself to homes or minds. Societies become its empire. Nations glorify purity, demanding flawless images of culture, ideology. Communities enforce reputation, silencing truth to preserve appearances. Corporations demand relentless performance, treating workers as machines of flawless output. Jung warned of collective possession, when the tyrant rules not one life, but millions. History bears the scars: wars, persecutions, genocides carried out in the name of purity. What can resist such power? Jung's answer was ruthless honesty. To confront the tyrant is to whisper truth against its silence, to admit imperfection, to embrace error, to confess humanity is rebellion. Consciousness becomes a shield, not of violence, but of truth. The tyrant cannot survive exposure. It thrives only in silence. The climax of this revelation is stark. The moment one dares to leave a mistake unhidden, to show a crack, to live flawed, suddenly the tyrant weakens. Its chains dissolve, its rule falters, and in the rubble of its empire, the self emerges, scarred, imperfect, but free. Jung believed this was individuation itself, the overthrow of perfection's tyranny by the acceptance of wholeness. So I ask you, in whose service do you live? The tyrant of perfection or the freedom of imperfection? And when silence presses against your chest, do you obey or do you dare to breathe? There comes a moment in every perfectionist's life when the reflection no longer matches the self. The face in the mirror smiles, but the eyes betray exhaustion. The posture is upright, but the breath is shallow. Jung described this as the apparition of the shadow, the ghost that appears when the mask of flawlessness becomes too heavy. The ghost is not imagined, it is the true self, disowned, staring back from glass darkened by denial. One patient told Jung of a recurring dream. She would stand before a mirror, arranging her hair, her clothes, her smile. But in the reflection, she was not alone. Another figure appeared, her double, identical but distorted, eyes hollow, mouth twisted into rage. This phantom reached through the glass, clawing at her throat. She would wake screaming, convinced the mirror had swallowed her. For Jung, this was no mere nightmare. It was the psyche's brutal message. The pursuit of perfection had birthed a ghost that now demanded to be seen. Modern research confirms the horror Jung intuited. Psychologists studying perfectionism note high rates of depersonalization, moments when individuals feel detached from themselves, as though watching a stranger live their life. Neuroscience reveals altered activity in the brain's self-referential network, suggesting that constant self-monitoring fractures identity. The ghost in the mirror is not metaphor, it is measurable dissociation. The self, split in two, stares back with unfamiliar eyes. But ancient wisdom had already encoded this image. In Greek myth, Narcissus gazed into water and saw not beauty, but obsession, a reflection that devoured him. In Christianity, Paul wrote of seeing through a glass darkly, warning that clarity comes only beyond illusion. In Buddhism, the mirror symbolizes mind itself, clouded when clung to, clear only when illusions fall away. Across traditions, the mirror has always warned, do not confuse the mask with the face, or you will meet the ghost. The warning signs of this haunting are chilling. The woman who practices her smile until it looks convincing. The man who rehearses conversations, terrified of saying the wrong word. The student who hides behind perfect notes while trembling with dread of exposure. Each reflection carries more effort, less truth. Eventually, the ghost emerges, the self that was denied, starved, silenced. The stages of the haunting unfold with merciless precision. First, distortion. The reflection feels slightly wrong, slightly false. Next, division. The self begins to feel split, one performing, one observing. Then possession. The ghost intrudes in dreams, in slips of the tongue, in sudden eruptions of rage or despair. Finally, collapse. The ghost breaks through, and the individual feels consumed by what they denied. Jung knew this as the return of the repressed, the shadow's violent demand for recognition. This haunting does not end at the individual level. Entire societies stare into mirrors clouded by illusion. Nations project images of purity, strength, progress, while shadows of corruption and violence claw at the glass. Communities cultivate reputations of harmony, while ghosts of betrayal whisper beneath. Jung warned that when collectives ignore their shadows, the ghost in the mirror becomes history itself. Wars, purges, genocides erupting from what was denied. What is the defense against such a haunting? Jung's answer was not to smash the mirror, but to face it, to look at the ghost and admit, this is me. To embrace the flaws, the rage, the despair, the weakness, not as sins, but as truths of the psyche. Consciousness becomes exorcism, not by banishing the ghost, but by integrating it. The mirror clears only when the whole self stands within it. The climax of this revelation is both terrifying and liberating. The ghost does not vanish, it dissolves into the self, no longer alien, no longer hostile. The eyes in the mirror become familiar, alive. The reflection is no longer flawless, but it is whole. Jung believed this was the path of individuation, the unification of mask and shadow, light and dark, face and ghost. So I ask you stare into your mirror, whose eyes look, the mask you have trained to smile, or the ghost you have starved into silence? And how long before the glass shatters under the weight of your denial? Perfection is not only an individual obsession, it multiplies, spreads, and infects groups, until entire communities live inside illusions polished like glass. Jung warned of this collective possession, the moment when the pursuit of flawlessness ceases to be personal and becomes a contagion of the soul. In such moments, the shadow does not stalk one person, it stalks nations. Imagine walking through a hall of mirrors. Each reflection shines brighter than the last. Families smiling in photographs, corporations advertising flawless success, governments boasting of purity and strength. Everywhere you turn, another radiant mask. But look closely, and you see cracks behind the shine, distortions twist, corruption, abuse, despair. The reflections promise perfection, but the hall is haunted by lies. Jung saw this as the great danger of archetypes unleashed in societies. When the collective ideal of flawlessness blinds, the shadow erupts with catastrophic force. Modern psychology has a name for this illusion: social perfectionism. Studies reveal that entire cultures enforce impossible standards, compelling individuals to perform happiness, success, and beauty, or risk exile. Neuroscience shows how group pressure activates the brain's threat system, creating conformity through fear. The collective hall of mirrors becomes a prison where every reflection polices the others, ensuring that no crack is admitted. Ancient wisdom told these stories long before science. In Greek myth, the city of Thebes tried to erase all impurity, but was cursed by the gods. In Christianity, societies that exalted flawless holiness burned heretics at their quest for purity, staining history with ash and blood. In Buddhism, the illusion of collective harmony is seen as one of the most dangerous delusions: peace that hides repression, calm that conceals rot. Every tradition warned, when groups chase perfection, shadows grow teeth. The signs of collective possession are everywhere. Towns that never speak of crime, yet lock their doors in fear. Families that insist on harmony while violence festers behind closed curtains. Corporations boasting of flawless values while workers collapse under invisible chains. Nations that parade prosperity in daylight while prisons overflow in the dark. The hall of mirrors gleams, but the reflections are cracked. The stages of this possession unfold predictably. First, celebration. Groups exalt their ideals, intoxicated by their own brilliance. Next, suppression. Flaws are denied, critics silenced, shadows forced underground. Then, distortion. The collective image begins to warp. Violence justified in the name of purity, corruption cloaked as necessity. Finally, eruption. The mirrors shatter, and the collective shadow spills out. Wars, revolutions, genocides. Jung witnessed this in the upheavals of his century, warning that the brighter the image of national perfection, the bloodier the shadow behind it. What, then, is the defense? Jung insisted that consciousness is the only shield, even at the collective level. To admit flaws publicly, to confess imperfection openly, to tell the truth against illusions. These acts break the spell of the mirrors. Families heal only when communities awaken, only when they're shattered. Nations survive only when they face their sins rather than deny them. Imperfection becomes not a threat, but a lifeline. The climax of this revelation is devastating. When the mirrors shatter, what is left is not radiance, but rubble. Yet in that rubble lies authenticity. The family that admits its fractures becomes capable of love. The community that confesses its corruption becomes capable of justice. The nation that faces its crimes becomes capable of redemption. Jung believed that wholeness is possible only after the illusions collapse. The hall of mirrors must fall for truth. So I ask you, in what hall of mirrors do you walk? What reflections seduce you? What illusions do you defend? And when the glass breaks, as it always does, will you cling to shards, or will you dare to step into the light of imperfection? Perfection is not only a dream, nor only a mask. It is a machine, cold, relentless, humming in silence. Jung described it as an archetype that takes possession, grinding souls into its gears. Once you're caught inside, you no longer live. You are processed. The machinery does not care for humanity, only for flawless output, and those who serve it eventually break. Picture a man whose life is a schedule carved in stone. His desk is organized with mathematical precision. His calendar allows no error, no pause. Every achievement fuels the next, each success a cog turning towards something higher, brighter. Impossible. But his eyes are hollow. His laughter is mechanical. In Jung's consulting room, such patients confessed to dreams of being devoured by iron teeth, of their bodies breaking into pieces to keep the machine running. Perfection had transformed their lives into an engine of ruin. Modern science supports this harrowing vision. Research on burnout describes perfectionists as high risk, their nervous systems trapped in cycles of hypervigilance, their brains locked in repetitive error detection loops. Cortisol floods their bodies until organs fail, immune system collapse. Neuroscientists liken it to a car engine revving endlessly without rest. The machinery consumes itself. The pursuit of flawlessness does not perfect life. It corrodes it into wreckage. But humanity has always feared this machine. In Greek myth, Sisyphus pushed his stone forever, trapped in endless labor that promised nothing. In Christianity, the Pharisees ground people beneath endless rules, machinery disguised as holiness. In Buddhism, craving perfection is compared to turning a wheel of suffering that spins without end. The ancients warned, the gears of flawlessness do not stop until the soul is crushed. The warning signs are there if you know how to hear the machine. The father who works until his hands shake, insisting he cannot stop. The student who revises the same page for hours, chasing an impossible precision. The woman whose home shines like glass, yet who weeps in secret, broken by her own rituals. Each one is a cog turning, unaware the machine is grinding them into dust. The stages of the machinery are merciless. First comes efficiency. Perfection feels empowering, controlled, almost divine. Next comes acceleration. The gears demand more, faster, stricter. Then comes entrapment. The self is bound to the cycle, unable to rest, terrified to stop. Finally comes collapse. The machine devours its servant, leaving nothing but ruin. Jung saw this repeatedly. Patients destroyed not by weakness, but by devotion to the machinery of flawlessness. And when perfection's machine expands to the collective, the devastation magnifies factories that demand flawless productivity until bodies collapse. Nations that exalt efficiency above humanity, marching citizens into wars in the name of purity. Families that transform into systems of appearance, each member a gear grinding silently toward collapse. Jung warned that collective machinery is the most lethal form, because once the gears lock into motion, history itself is dragged through its teeth. What is the protocol of survival? Jung's answer was radical. Step out of the machine. Refuse its rhythm. Allow flaws, interruptions, pauses. Consciousness is the only sabotage. Awareness that no life can be flawless. That wholeness requires imperfection. To stop turning with the gears, even for a moment, is to reclaim humanity from the machinery of ruin. The climax of this revelation, when one escapes the machine, silence floods in. At first it feels unbearable, the absence of grinding, the loss of rhythm, but slowly breath returns. The hands stop trembling, the eyes awake. The self emerges from the wreckage, not flawless, but alive. Jung called this individuation, the breaking of archetypal possession, the birth of the true self from the wreckage of the false. So I ask you, what machine do you serve? What gears devour your nights, your body, your soul? And when the grinding becomes unbearable, will you remain inside, or will you dare to step out, flawed, trembling, but free? Perfection, at its end, is not a jewel. It is a crown of thorns. Jung knew this better than most. The pursuit of flawlessness does not elevate, it crucifies. The black crown is the final stage of the curse when the mask has been worn too long, when the machinery has devoured too much, when collapse has left only fragments. It sits heavy on the head of those who once believed themselves pressing until blood runs down their temples. Imagine a woman who built her life as a monument, her children immaculate, her home radiant, her career impeccable. She was admired, envied, worshipped. But in Jung's consulting room, her words fell like ice. She dreamed of standing before, wearing a crown made of glass shards to her scalp. She smiled as they applauded, but blood dripped into her eyes. Jung recognized the symbol at once. She had reached the summit of perfection, only to discover it was ruin disguised as glory. Science confirms what this dark vision suggests. Psychologists studying perfectionism speak of the paradox of achievement. Those who appear most flawless often report the greatest emptiness. Neuroimaging shows diminished activity in brain regions tied to pleasure and reward in perfectionists, as though success itself has become sterile. The crown glitters, but it cuts. The pursuit of flawlessness leaves no room for joy, only exhaustion wrapped in admiration. Ancient traditions foresaw this black coronation. In Greek tragedy, kings who sought to embody perfection, Agamemnon, Oedipus, found their reigns ending in blood and blindness. In Christianity, Christ's crown of thorns symbolized both the cruelty of human ideals and the paradox of transcendence through suffering. In Buddhism, the grasping after enlightenment itself is portrayed as a trap, the seeker weighed down by the illusion of purity. The crown of perfection is always poisoned. The signs of this final stage are haunting. The smile that never reaches the eyes, the applause that echoes hollow in the chest, the compulsive need to polish, arrange, correct, even when there is nothing left to improve, and the silence that follows each victory, heavier than any failure. The black crown does not appear suddenly. It is woven from years of denial, years of blood offered to the altar of flawlessness. The stages leading here are predictable. First comes devotion, the pursuit of perfection as noble quest. Next, domination, the self consumed by the ideal, bound in chains of its own making. Then collapse. Cracks widen, shadows erupt. Humanity buckles under strain. Finally, coronation. The perfectionist stands crowned in glass and thorns, adored yet broken, flawless yet hollow, radiant yet bleeding. The curse completes itself in silence, and this coronation is not only personal. Societies wear the black crown as well. Nations that declare themselves superior inevitably find their glory dripping with blood. Communities that boast of harmony conceal wounds festering beneath. Families that enforce flawlessness end in estrangement, their photographs immaculate, while their members drift like ghosts. Jung warned that when collectives chase perfection, they too end crowned in ruin. What then is the escape from this crown? Jung's answer was radical. Refuse it. Do not wear the symbol of flawlessness. Let the crown fall. To admit imperfection, to embrace contradiction, to live flawed but authentic, this is freedom. Consciousness again becomes the only shield. To see the shadow and accept it is to be whole. To deny it is to bleed beneath the glass forever. The climax of this truth is unforgettable. When the crown falls, silence shatters. The individual stands trembling, scarred, bloodied, but free. The applause fades, the mask breaks, the machine stops. What remains is the self, imperfect, incomplete, human, and in this imperfection lies the only wholeness possible. Jung's revelation was clear. The curse of perfection ends not in flawlessness, but in acceptance of the shadow. So I leave you with this final question, whispered like an echo from Jung's own lips. Will you wear the black crown until it breaks you, or will you dare to place it on the altar, walk away, and finally be whole?